So in this one, we will talk about the relationships in database. We have relationships, right? And we will talk about them and how we can present them in database or designing ERDs. For example, the entity relationship diagrams, which are kind of used to design the database schemas. We are going to talk about the different types of, how do we present the relationships and how are the different components of ERDs are. And in the next one, we are going to try practicing drawing one. Okay, so if, for example, you have two entities, okay, so this is a schema where we kind of design them. When we are drawing them, we use ovals and squares. We will talk about them as well, but I'm just talking about the designing here. So in this case, if we want to talk about the one relationship that they are only connected, something like this thing is connected to this one, but that means this thing doesn't have any other relationship with it. There's only one relationship. Then we use this kind of, a tick here to illustrate the relationship. Similarly, if we have many relationships, for example, we will use this arrow here, right? And if we have something else, like if we have a relationship where we have one and only one, means it can have only one relationship, then we do two ticks. Okay, so it means that we could have only one and only one relationship of this entity with this entity, right? There couldn't be more than one relationships. Okay, then we have 0 or 1. So it could be a 0 relationship, that's why we use 0 here, and we use 1 here. Okay, so it means it could have a 0 relationship or it could have a 1 relationship with the E entity with the other E2 entity, for example, right? Similarly, if we want to kind of describe that there's one-to-many relationship, so we one-to-many relationship with this. We use this one or many, so we have kind of we talked about a tick for one, arrow for many, and one and only one. So we have kind of joined these together to kind of illustrate one or many relationship. Then we have 0 or many. Right, in 0 or many, we would have something like this. We would have a 0 and a many relationship. We also use M and N or M and 1 notation, means many to many relationship, many to one relationship, or one to many relationship. That's also used in database, means if this entity has a one to many relationship with each, we'll use one here and M here. This is most commonly used when we are drawing databases instead of designing them. Designing we use because we use softwares to do this. We can do this basically using the arrows, right? And then we have something called, wait a minute, okay. So we have a 1 here, and then we have a many here, or we can have a many here and a many here. And also means many, but we use this as a different notation. Okay. Now let's talk about the components of a ER diagram, especially when you are drawing the components of a ER diagram. So for an entity, we use a square to represent it. An entity is, anything that we are going to represent, like a student, like a customer, like an order. Anything that can have properties can be represented in the attribute. Sorry, in the square rectangle. Yeah. Okay. So entity that cannot be uniquely identified and its attributes by its attributes and relies on relationship with other entities is called a weak entity. And we represent a weak entity by a kind of double squares or rectangles, where one rectangle is inside of another. A weak entity cannot be represented by only its attributes, and it requires the other attributes like a bank account, where we have a bank. So bank account can't be only uniquely identified. In some cases it is, but it does depend on the other entities, right? So this is weak entity. What else we have? We have attribute. We use oval for attribute. I don't know if kind of oval or not, but we use ovals for the attribute. For example, if a student has a roll number, we would represent it with the oval and we will match it with, the entity. Now there are some kinds of attributes. We can have simple. This one is simple because this is nothing specific attached to it. We have kind of composite attribute. Composite attribute means that made of more than one simple attribute, right? So for example, if I have an attribute called address, it could have, various other attributes. Like it have a status code, it could have a country, or a postal code. Status is postal code, sorry, and the PIN number or the zip code of the country or the city. So in this case, these are the composite attributes because they're kind of deriving from a single attribute, right? So this was the composite attribute. Then we can have derived attribute, where some attribute is derived from other attribute and we use it with dotted oval. Okay, so for example, I have a student, okay, and the student have, student have roll number as the attribute, and then student have the date of birth. In the date of birth, we can call the age as the derived attribute because it is going to be kind of, determined from DOB, which is our date of birth. We can't make it as we can make it as a composite because it can also be, the composite attribute because it is kind of deriving from the simple attribute, which is DOB. Okay. So these were some attributes that we talked about. We can have multi-valued attribute, right? Attribute that can hold multiple values. For example, for a phone number, represented using two ovals, one inside of another, and the phone number because phone number can be, or emails because we can have more than one email stored. So that's multi-valued attributes. And then we can have a key attribute, for example, like for a student, if the primary key is roll number, we're gonna put a little line here to show that that's a primary key. We often do it when we are drawing the ERDs, right? So this was kind of the little properties that we use when drawing ERDs. Let's talk about the relationships, right? Relationships, how do we represent the relationships when we're really making the ERDs? So let's just talk on that. In databases, mostly we don't draw them manually, we draw them using softwares. So let's talk about the relationship, that how one entity is related to another. Okay. So now we can have one-to-one relationship. We talked about this. We use this one-to-one relationship. We use these two texts to kind of describe them. But in the one-to-one relationships, how do we actually do? We basically use a diamond to represent a relationship between two squares, or I always call squares rectangle, man. Okay, so we call it as this. Maybe this has one-to-one relationship. Okay, for example, a person can have one ID card or a passport or whatever. So this is a relationship we can say has, right? We can have one-to-many relationship. We have two entities and they can have one-to-many relationship in which we have, we can say one-to-many, and maybe a customer can order many things, right? Then we can have many-to-one relationship, many-to-one, and we are going to have this here, the diamond and the entities. For example, many students can enroll in a college or study in a college. We can have many examples of it. Enrolled M1. And then we talked about the many to many relationship, right? In the many to many relationship, we have many attributes or many instances of an entity linking with many instances of another entity, right? So let's do it. We have an entity here, then we have a diamond shape here, and then we again have an entity here. So we see that many students have many projects to solve, their lives are not easy, right? So this was the many to many relationships. And we use MN or use MN, it's the same thing. So these were the relationships and how do we represent them. In the next one we will be going over how to really make ERD, means how to draw it. In the designation part, we only write these squares, we only write the entity name here, and then we write the attributes here. We do the same for other entity, and then we kind of link them with the relationship, these relationships that we talked about. This was 1, this was many, this was 0, and then we talk about 0 or many, 0 or 1, these type of relationships that we talked about. Okay? We could have also 0 or 1 and only 1 as well.